House Government Operations Committee for Monday, March 13th will come to order, please. Madam Clerk, take the roll.
Representatives Bolso, Carr, Chisholm, Clemens, Crawford, Eldridge, Faison, Hakeem, Haynes, Himmer, Johnson, Jones, Kiesling, Kumar, Lafferty, Littleton, Martin, McCalman, Rudder, Vice Chairman Reedy, Chairman Reagan.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Members, do we have any personal orders or announcements? You're recognized, Representative Eldridge.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have a couple of folks with me today from up in Granger County. I have Mark Briscoe and Brett Coffey, the Director and Assistant Director of Granger County Schools.
Do we have other personal orders? Seeing none, members, we're going to launch into our calendar. First up is House Bill 71.
Motion.
We have a motion and a second. And where's the presenter? Okay. We will roll House Bill 71 to the heel. Next up, item number 2 on our calendar, House Bill 1366, which is being carried by Chairman Faison.
Motion.
We have a motion and a second. Chairman Faison, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I don't know if you've ever dealt with someone. Well, wait a minute. We have an amendment that writes the bill. Should we?
It's
traveling on it?
It's traveling with the bill.
So let me tell you about the amendment. Where I'm from, if you have served time behind bars, extended period of time, when you get out, you need almost to be able to afford an attorney just to figure out and navigate how to get back. Your driver's license, your social security card, vocational training records, anything like that. It's a nightmare that you're constantly trying to figure out. So House Bill 1366 requires the Tennessee Department of Correction to provide an inmate with crucial necessary identification documents to assist an inmate in obtaining employment once released from prison, which include a photo ID, license, if the person's eligible pursuant to the existing state law, a certified copy of the birth certificate, if it's obtainable, a social security card or replacement security card, if obtainable, a copy of the vocational training record or work record of the inmate, if applicable, and notification to the inmate of whether he or she is eligible to apply for occupational license or certification under Tennessee law. And that's what this bill does. And I think it's going to help us with our recidivism, because if you give them a reason to progress and do well, hopefully they won't consider staying in the lifestyle that got them there behind bars in the first place. And I'll take questions.
Members, you've heard an explanation of the bill. Do we have questions of the sponsor? Seeing Representative Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do like the bill. I was wondering if there couldn't be
Don't tell
something put
anybody
in.
that. Just kidding.
Out of order. Go ahead, Representative Johnson.
Was wondering if there's couldn't be something put in there about voting rights too. That's a very difficult task for a lot of folks when they're leaving and being incarcerated. Running the gauntlet on how to get your voting rights back. So just curious if it covers that at all.
Chairman Faison, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative. 100% agree with you that it's important for everybody to be able to vote that can legally vote. This is not my bill. This is Representative Farmer's. He's run behind, and this committee cannot amend the bill in such a way. So I don't disagree with that, but it's not my bill. It's Representative Farmer's bill, and I just know that we can't deal with that in GovOps.
Follow up.
And it's not there. Is that correct?
You're
Correct.
recognized.
Thank you.
Further questions of the sponsor?
Hey,
You're recognized, Chairman
it
Faison.
does provide for the lady from Knox County. It does provide for the ID and license. So that's all you would need to be able to go and get your voter ID is a state issued ID. And this bill provides that they get that before they leave.
Follow up.
yeah, there's some other things that they have to do that they don't always understand. But yes, an ID is definitely part of it. Thank you.
Other questions of the sponsor? Representative Martin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a time limit when this services of helping these people that are getting back into society?
Chairman Faison, you're
Like a
recognized.
year or 6 months? or
I'm
when does
sorry.
When does it end?
Chairman Faison.
Could we refer to legal on that, Mr. Chair?
Certainly. We'll go out of session. Legal, please introduce yourself and give us an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Doug Garrett. I'm with the Office of Legal Services. Representative Martin, in response to the question regarding timelines, there is a timeline that precedes the release. And that's in subdivision B1 of section 1 that reads 9 months before an inmate's release from custody, the department, in coordination with the Department of Safety, shall identify whether the inmate has the current form of identification and begin the process of gathering documentation required for the issuance of photo identification.
Follow up, sir.
So all that we're doing is doing while they're still incarcerated, but after they're released, the state no longer has a role to play. Am I reading that correctly?
You recognize legal?
Thank you, Chairman. Doug Garrett with Legal again. What I can read of the bill, it looks like the work done by the department is pre-release, and that well, I can't speak to the intent, but the substantive provisions of this bill pertain to how the inmate who is released can get their identification and be able to apply that toward employment or potentially voting rights and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Follow up. Any further questions for legal while we're out of session? Seeing none, we're back in session. Chairman Faison, do you have any closing comments? I see no other questions.
Motion for a positive recommendation.
We already have one. Are you calling the question, sir?
Question on the bill.
The question's been called. Any objections?
That's legal. I'm on the committee.
Levity. There we go. The question has been called. All in favor of a positive recommendation and sending this bill to calendar and rules indicate by saying aye. All opposed, nay. Bill moves out to calendar and rules. Thank you. Members, I see that the first bill, which we rolled to the heel, the sponsor has arrived. Do I hear a motion to go out of order? Take it up. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. All right, we're out of order. We're rearranging the order. Back to item number 1 on the calendar. We have a motion and a second. This is House Bill 71. You're recognized, Representative Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and I do apologize for being late. I was over in pensions, and if I left, the quorum left, so I apologize for that. House Bill 71 provides in part the following, that a protest cannot be considered if the central or the CPO, the Central Procurement Office, cancels a bid or a bid solicitation. A bond must be provided at the time of a protest or appeal. The amount of the bond, it also must include protests and appeals may be filed electronically or by hard copy. Also that certain terms may not be included in state contracts. The bill writes into law things that already exist in the code, rules, and procedures of Tennessee or the common law. Combining them here and codifying them into law provides a source for the CPO to rely upon negotiating contracts.
Thank you. And just a point of clarity, when you say protest, you're referring to a protest of the contract. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Members, you've heard an explanation. Do we have questions of the sponsor? Representative Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say it didn't go without notice that nobody objected to us going out of order for the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee. I'm sure there's no coincidence there. What led to the need for this legislation? I'm trying to figure out where this came from and kind of what scenario this is seeking to resolve.
You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Representative Clemens. This was brought to me by General Services, and they may be able to provide more detail if they are here, and I think they're on
They are here,
the list to testify.
but they're not on the list, however.
Okay.
That said, If you wish for us to let you confer, we'll be glad to let you do that.
We'll roll with it.
All right.
So the bill writes into law, let me restate that again, Representative Clemens. So the bill writes into law things that already exist in the code, rules and procedures of Tennessee or the common law, combining them here and codifying them into law provides a source for the CPO to rely on in negotiating contracts. The bill will increase the efficiency of the contracting process. And again, it is not in response to any contract or any event that happens. So it's really a move to try to provide efficiency.
Representative Clemens?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what I'm going through here is the list of prohibitions, and I'm,
They are on the list. Okay.
it prohibits anyone from acting as an attorney in litigation of this contract, even though we just recently passed legislation authorizing the Speaker of the House to defend the state of Tennessee. Do you have any concerns that this conflicts with that bill that we recently passed?
Chairman Hicks, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not. That has not, I guess as I went through this, that has not entered my mind.
Okay.
Representative Clemens?
And I certainly understand that. I mean, that bill just went through the House, I think, last Monday evening, so you probably didn't consider that in the formation of this legislation with the Department of General Services. In our fiscal duty to the state of Tennessee and the taxpayers, do you have any concerns about the prohibitions set forth in this with regards to limiting the state from entering into a contract subject to this bill?
You recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not. I think, again, to reiterate, I think it really makes it more efficient for those who want to enter into a bid and makes it much more clear for anyone that wants to enter in a bid for an RFP in the state.
Representative Clemens? By the way, we've just discovered that we can put that witness on the list if you would prefer to ask the department.
That would be wonderful, Mr. Chairman.
All right. With that said, we'll go out of session. We'll call up Ms. Linda Elam from the department. And for the new members on the committee, this is one of our former colleagues from the House. Welcome back. Make sure you've got a red light in your microphone there. Give us your full name and who you are representing.
My name is Linda Elam, and I am the legislative liaison with the Department of General Services. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us to speak.
Representative Clemens, you're recognized with your question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you give us a little context requiring the necessity for this legislation?
My colleague apologize, I did not
I'm sorry.
introduce him. His name is Kevin Bartels.
Well, this unfortunately, you have to be on the list. Your name's the only one we have on the list.
His is also, they were together.
All right, hang on a second.
I can look it up on my computer if you need me to.
All right, we will assume that we have a administrative faux pas here, so we'll allow him to testify. Sir, please give us your name and position and address the question.
My name is Kevin Bartels, an attorney with the Central Procurement Office.
Pull the mic a little closer, sir.
Kevin Bartels, an attorney for the Central Procurement Office, Department of General Services.
You're recognized to answer the question.
As far as the onus of the bill it was to basically allow protests to be filed electronically. That's something that's currently not in the statute. It also provides that a cancellation of a protest or cancellation of a protest cannot be appealed to the State Protest Committee. That's consistent with the powers of the Chief Procurement Officer in Tennessee Code Annotated 12-3502. The bill also contains certain prohibitions that you were asking about that have been common law or reflect Attorney General opinions or are scattered elsewhere through the code. These are included because these are often the source of considerable discussion during negotiations. They're not enforceable against the state as a matter of law, but they nonetheless come up. By enacting this legislation, this will decrease the amount of time is spent in negotiations of these contracts and will help the agencies get the contracts in place that they need. Otherwise, negotiations can significantly delay the procurement of the services or goods by an agency.
Representative Clements, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you providing that clarification. I'm curious about amendment number 1 that changes with regard to the jurisdictional clauses set forth in these procurement contracts. Why did we change the reference to Davidson County in the court list there to the Chancery Courts of Williamson County?
You recognize, sir. You recognize, Ms. Elam.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the question. That was made at the request of several members of the legislature and went through my office and the governor's staff and was agreed to as being an acceptable compromise. There was talk perhaps that if it weren't done precisely, that suit might be available in all corners of the state, which would require the attorney general, lawyers and staff to pack up, drive to where they're going, do the hearing, drive back, and all this time they're not working on other matters. So we really needed it to be within the Nashville or the donut, and we thought Williamson County had good courts for that.
Representative Clements, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious why the change from Davidson County to Williamson County. That seems like we're legislating forum shopping of some extent. Did they provide you with any explanation why that change was necessary?
You're recognized.
No, sir, they did not.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions of our guests while they're here? Seeing none, thank you very much. You are excused. We're back in session. Do we have questions of the sponsor of the bill? Question has been called on the bill. We are now voting on sending House Bill 71 to calendar and rules with a positive recommendation. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay.
No.
Ayes have it. Bill moves out. Calendar rules. If you wish to be recorded as a no, please let the clerk know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Members, we're on item number 3 now. House Bill 1176 being carried by Chairman Garrett. We have a motion and a second for a positive recommendation. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House
Wait,
Bill.
1 second, sir. Let me interrupt. Members, this is traveling with an amendment, House Transportation Committee Amendment number 4395. Thank you. Now you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We don't need to add the amendment. It's on it.
Mr. Chairman, this is legislation that reconstitutes an airport authority board with over 500,000 population inside a metropolitan area. It reconstitutes the board where the Speaker of the House has 3 picks for the commission. The Speaker of the Senate has 3. The governor has 3. And then the mayor of the metropolitan area of where the airport is located has 1. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Representative Clemens, you were first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand we have witnesses on the list. Can we ask them to testify, go out of session and have them testify before we ask the sponsor questions, please?
Absolutely. We are going to go out of session and we'll ask Mr. Kurt Schaefer, is that correct? Come up forward, please, sir. Please make sure you've got a red light in that microphone. If you need to, pull it closer so we can hear you. Give us your name and your position and who you represent, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Kirk Schaefer. I'm the sole principal of D. Kirk Schaefer PLLC in Washington, D.C. And in this particular matter, I'm an independent aviation expert.
Thank you, sir. Please proceed with your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, as stated, my name is Kirk Schaefer. And I appreciate the opportunity this afternoon to speak to you on the bill pending before you. I've devoted the last 37 years of my law career to aviation law and more specifically to airport law. It is my privilege to be the only person in the history of the Federal Aviation Administration to be the Associate Administrator for Airports twice. First during the George W. Bush administration and most recently in the Trump administration. As the Associate Administrator for Airports, I was the final agency decision maker for the federal government on all matters pertaining to federal grant assurance compliance by federally obligated airports like the one here in Nashville. Grant assurance compliance is directly implicated in the bill before you. Many of my grant assurance decisions were appealed to federal circuit courts around the country. None of my decisions has ever been overturned. Prior to being the Associate Administrator for Airports at the FAA, I was the General Counsel of the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority for 18 years. And during part of those 18 years, I was simultaneously the #2 executive on the staff of the Airport Authority. By the Metropolitan Airport Authorities Act, as it is presently enacted, the Airport Authority is an agent and instrumentality of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. I have been intimately familiar with the act since 1986, and in fact, I drafted parts of the statute as it has existed from time to time. Thus, both the City of Nashville and the Airport Authority have a stake in your deliberations and the outcome of those deliberations, especially as it bears on the relationship between the Airport Authority and the Federal Aviation Administration. That relationship with the FAA is founded upon the federal grant assurances, which I mentioned previously. Grant assurance compliance is the direct key to federal funding of airports across the country. If you're a sponsor and you violate a grant assurance, either you correct it or your finances get cut off from the federal government. I wrote a couple of the grant assurances that are presently in effect, and I provided technical assistance to Congress on numerous instances in the development of other grant assurances. Specifically, these grant assurances require that the FAA ensure that the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority is operationally capable of performing all grant assurance and other federal obligations, is legally capable of fulfilling those obligations, is willing to do so, and can do so safely. It is not obvious to me, as the legislation is presently drafted, how the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority will be able to demonstrate this going forward. Based on my prior experience, it is not clear to me what the objectives of the sponsors of this legislation have in mind, but I can promise you this: it will cause conflict between the state of Tennessee, the city of Nashville, the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority, and the Federal Aviation Administration. That conflict will be substantial and it will be expensive. There are numerous examples of this in recent history. Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Paulding County, Georgia, in which I was specifically involved, and still pending after 7 years of federal litigation, Jackson, Mississippi. If this conflict develops in regard to the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority, then the Airport Authority will be in legal limbo until that conflict is resolved. When, at the time of its greatest and most expensive expansion in its history, with more expansion coming online day by day, the Airport Authority will be distracted from that sole objective. The consistency and constancy of governance for which the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority has always been known will be jeopardized. First, although the several technical qualifications presently contained in the statute as regards its commissioners may survive, the system of checks and balances between the executive and legislative branches, which is a bedrock principle of American government, will be gone. There will be no more appointment by the executive and inquiry and confirmation by the legislative branch. Likewise, the due process requirements for removing commissioners of the Airport Authority will be gone. There will be no more hearing and no more supermajority vote of the legislative body to
Mr.
remove a
Schaefer, I must
commissioner.
ask you to conclude your comments, please, sir, in the interest of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finally, you need to keep in mind the impact that this turmoil will have upon the finances of the airport authority. It will send signals when the airport authority is most in need of a strong bond rating and the ability to issue additional bonds measured in hundreds of millions of dollars at the most favorable interest rates. Those will be placed in jeopardy. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'll take any questions that members of your committee may have.
Members, I show Representative Hakeem. Do you have a question of this, or was yours for the sponsor, sir? All right, you're recognized for a question of our guest.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for taking your time to be with us. I have basically three questions. The first one, the grant assurance, is that monies we might get from the federal government? Or I'm trying to see if we get monies for the federal government.
You're recognized, sir.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, Representative. Every time a federally obligated airport receives a grant from the FAA, including Nashville International Airport, they sign a contract. And as a part of that contract, presently, there are 39 grant assurances that are incorporated into that grant agreement. Most of those 39 grant assurances come directly from federal statutes that control the funding of airports at the federal level. So the airport authority or whoever the sponsor happens to be in a given airport, they promise to the FAA that they will perform those 39 grant assurances. If they are later found to be in violation of those grant assurances, first they're given an opportunity to correct their mistake and get back into compliance. If they don't do that, then their federal funding is cut off. And people don't quite understand usually how broad that is. That not only means that your future funding is cut off until you come back into grant assurance compliance, that means that your presently active grants that are building projects on the airport today are stopped. And if things really get bad, the FAA will go back to your closed grants as far back as 6 years into the past and will claw back the proceeds of those grants and put them back in the airport improvement program trust fund, which I used to administer.
All right. Thank you for that one, sir. Mr. Chairman.
One follow-up, please. We need to watch our time. You're recognized, Representative Hakeem.
Okay. All right. If I'm translating your comments previously, you see where there can be conflict in the operation and of the airport, and I'm trying to understand what the benefits are to our state for this legislation to go forward. And I don't know, it just sounds.
Representative, that's more appropriately directed to the sponsor, sir. Please don't ask him to opine on the benefits to our state. Would you like to reform your question, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this have the, you might tell me to stop again. Does it have the potential of creating chaos within the airport system?
Again, sir, I would ask you to withdraw that.
Yes, sir.
Representative Hemmer, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you for coming here today. Rarely we have experts that have such significant expertise in the area that we're looking at. So I'm really concerned after hearing your testimony about
Check your microphone, please, sir.
Can you hear me?
There you go. That's
Thank
better.
you.
Thank you.
Rarely appreciate you coming here. So one of the questions I had is about, if this bill were to become law and litigation develops, will the FAA resolve it?
You're recognized, sir.
The FAA will not resolve it. It's a matter between the parties to litigation, as you say. The FAA will stand aside and answer questions. They will provide general guidance. They will not specifically tell the parties to any conflict specifically what they must do or must not do in order to resolve the conflict, but they will give technical assistance to try to guide the parties toward a resolution which complies with the airport's grant assurances.
One quick follow-up, sir. Again, we have others on the list, so we need to be conscious of time. You recognized Representative Hemmer.
Defer to the others on the.
What's that?
I defer.
Next on the list is Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for being here, Mr. Kirk. In your experience, have there been any recent examples of a state or political jurisdiction substituting itself for the existing Airport Authority Board that have been successful?
You recognize, sir?
I am not aware of any that have been successful. Your question, Representative Jones, brings to mind Charlotte and Atlanta Hartsfield, the busiest passenger airport on earth, and Jackson, Mississippi. All three of those instances were where the state legislature tried to substitute its judgment and start running those airports. The one in Charlotte, North Carolina failed. The one in Atlanta was withdrawn, and the one in Jackson, Mississippi has been tied up in federal court for 7 years. It presently is at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, and nothing has been heard from the Fifth Circuit in 2 years, I believe.
Representative Jones, you recognize for follow-up?
I'll defer to my colleagues.
Next on my list is Representative Balso. I'm sorry. You recognize, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Schaefer, for being here this morning. You stated at the outset that you were appearing today as an independent aviation expert. My first question is simply, have you been retained by some party to offer expert guidance?
I have not,
You
sir.
recognize, sir?
Pardon me, Mr. Chairman. I have not, sir.
May I
You
follow?
recognize for follow-up?
Thank you. Are you being compensated for your time here today by anyone?
I am not. I do quite a bit of public speaking, representative, simply for the benefit of the aviation system and specifically the airport system in this country.
Representative Balso, I'm limiting follow-ups. Representative Chisholm, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. From your purview, how do you see legislation changing the systems that you all have in place currently?
You recognize, sir?
The way I see it, Representative, is this. There are, in the Metropolitan Airport Authorities Act as it presently exists, there are specific criteria attached to each of the board seats around the table. You have to have a couple of pilots. You have to have someone who is eminently qualified in finance. You have to have someone who is eminently qualified in business. You have to have a practicing attorney. You have to have a practicing engineer. The way the system operates today, the chief executive of the metropolitan government, the mayor, appoints those individuals based on his evaluation, and then those nominees are put through a confirmation process in front of the Metropolitan Council. And so those 40 individuals, they also judge, for example, what is eminently qualified, quote unquote, when it comes to finance or to business. If this legislation as it's presently drafted were to become law, then in the case of each one of those seats, one person would make that judgment, whether it's the Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Senate, the governor, the mayor, and there would be no check and balance between the co-equal branches of the state government and the metro government to ensure that those qualifications are in fact met.
Follow up, Representative Chisholm.
Thank you.
Next on the list, Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for being here. You said you were around when this was created, and I understand that the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority was created by Metro pursuant to the Metropolitan Airport Authority Act and Tennessee law, and that that law expressly states that the public and governmental bodies acting as agencies and instrumentalities of the creating and participating municipalities. I mean, it pretty expressly states that the airport authority is to be controlled by the entity that created it. Is that your understanding?
You recognize, sir.
That's correct, sir. While the airport authority in Nashville is not a department of the metropolitan government, nonetheless, it is an agent and it acts for the metropolitan government on all aviation matters within the bounds of that statute.
Representative Clemens, one follow-up, please.
Thank you. And given that that is the express wording of the Tennessee Code authorizing the municipal government or metro government to control and control that entity acting as an agency, I think there's a little debate here. So you had spoken extensively in your testimony to the fact of the instability that would be created by this. Given that tourism and travel is a large part of not only Metropolitan Nashville's local economy, as well as the greater Nashville region's local economy, which provides an overwhelming majority of the revenues benefiting the entire state of Tennessee. Do you yourself, given your history and knowledge, consider legislation such as this and the instability that would result therefrom a direct threat to the integrity and fiscal integrity of the local economy in greater Nashville region?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Bolso, you're recognized for follow-up, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schaefer, my only other follow-up question was, you've obviously incurred some travel expenses to be here today. Do you have any agreement with anyone to reimburse you for those travel expenses?
I do not, sir. Very unfortunately, I just happened to be in town caring for my son-in-law who is very gravely ill. And my friends from Nashville, I lived here for 20 years, and my friends here figured out that I was in town and made me aware of this opportunity.
Thank you. Representative Hammer, follow-up, please.
Thank you. What other consequences should Metro Nashville Airport Authority anticipate if this legislation were to go through?
You recognize, sir.
I think the first consequence, Representative, is going to be in the financial markets. I did have an opportunity to attend the Finance Committee meeting of the Airport Authority a few days ago. It was noted in the meeting that the Airport Authority's bond rating had just ticked up one level, which of course is good news because that means that their interest rate when they issue bonds should go down. But when leadership and stability start at the top of any organization, and the Airport Authority here is no exception to that rule. And so in the event this legislation becomes statute, it's reasonable to conclude that there will be a period of instability while the various stakeholders, the state of Tennessee, the metropolitan government, the airport authority, resolve their differing views of what should be happening at the airport. And in the meantime, the financial markets in New York and wherever else are watching that, and that necessarily impacts their view of the debt that the airport authority presently has issued. I apologize if I forget the grand total of that, but it's a very large number. And I do recall from the Finance Committee meeting a few days ago that the airport authority is anticipating issuing additional bond indebtedness in the range of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your participation, sir. You are excused. Members,
you,
we're
Mr.
back in
Chairman.
session. The chair will recognize the sponsor of the bill for comments. Just a second, sir. Your mic is not on.
Got it.
And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
before I recognize you for closing comments, the committee had some questions for you. So
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if it's okay, I do have some not closing comments, but comments in response to his testimony, if that's all right.
you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there was a lot said during that testimony. Now, I don't know Mr. Schaefer, and I don't know his background other than what he had testified today, but I vehemently disagree with his representation of some of the facts regarding some of the lawsuits that he has named. So let me kind of clear up some of that testimony that this is going to automatically create some sort of financial or operational chaos. That's just simply not true. The reason is because those three airports that he referred to, those lawsuits were filed because the cities or the counties creating those authorities created a brand new entity instead of what this legislation does, which does not create a new entity, that does not create any sort of ownership control over the authority. Those three lawsuits is exactly what those municipalities did, which did unequivocally run against the FFA approval because the witness talked about a sponsor. The sponsor means the city or the municipality that is actually going to operate the airport authority. So in those three lawsuits, the one Charlotte's taking forever that he mentioned that's could happen here, right, is because they created a new entity to try to replace the entity that controlled the airport. Members of this committee, that's not what this legislation is doing. This legislation is just simply allowing appointments to the commission through representatives from the state of Tennessee through their respective speakers of the House and the governor. And the reason is, the utmost reason is because the state funds the airport. So I wanted to also share that according to the bylaws of the airport authority, they were created in 1969 by statute. We, as a General Assembly, of course, I don't know if any of us were here in 1969, but in 1969, the airport authority was created by this body. They are governed, their membership are governed by a statute, 424105, which is the very statute that's before you today, changing the composition of the membership. I would implore you members, that's it. That's all this legislation does. So we have consulted with our comptroller, who is here today, about the bond issue. You heard a lot of stuff about the financial aspect of this particular legislation. Well, we have a legal opinion from the airport's authority, from their bond counsel, outlining the very nature that this will not in any form or fashion affect their bond rating, affect their ability to pay the bonds, or affect whatsoever what bonds are in place now and what bonds they may want to issue in the future. There's been no legal opinion provided to me that says otherwise. We also have a legal opinion from the very law firm that represents the cities in the lawsuits that the witness proclaimed that says, reviewing this particular legislation, that says this does not impact any FAA regulation about confirming, approving what we're doing here under this legislation to appoint commissioners. Why? Because we're not changing any type of control with the legislation. We're not creating any new entity that's going to be responsible. And why is that important? It's because the entity, if you create a new one, the FFA, which the FFA should.
FAA, sir.
I said FFA. I've been saying that. The FAA should make sure that the sponsoring entity can understand and have people involved that know about the bonds, that know about the operations of an airport. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, there's no one changing hands here that already operates the airport under this legislation. So the witness is here on behalf of one of the commissioners that oppose this legislation, has opposed this legislation since the beginning. And this legislation provides that the airport in Nashville is now not just about Nashville. 70% of those that use the airport come outside of Davidson County. 30% of those still use inside Davidson County. Under the OWN FAA's guidelines, the MSO is about 14 counties that impact the airport. Now, we know the impact of the Nashville airport is a whole lot more than just those 14 counties. But even in the FAA, it's not just about Davidson County. Davidson County and others that would apply under this legislation provide no funding to the Metro Airport. The Metro Airport is a successful entity. It has great leadership. It's going to be successful, we hope, from now until long days ahead. We need to make sure that Metro Airport Authority is successful. We want to partner with them. Tennesseans across this state, not just those from Davidson County, are funding the airport. So I hope that the point of this legislation is to make all tax-paying Tennesseans a part of this airport. Since, Mr. Chairman, it is Tennesseans that fund it.
Thank you. Members, I have 5 questioners on my list. We'll begin with Representative Hakeem, and I'll ask you to keep your questions on point, please, and as succinct as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Representative, I must say to you that this legislation gives me great and grave pause. What it goes back to me in my mind, I can't remember the priest's name, but this was in Germany. So first they came for the Jews. I said nothing. Came for other groups. I said nothing. Then finally they came for me. Now what I'm getting at is big government taking over local control. And, where does it end? Does it stop in Nashville? Or does it go to other metropolitan areas? And I don't see the benefit. So my question to you is, has the airport authority in Nashville, in Davidson County, been irresponsible to the point that we feel it has to be taken over by the state? And am I correct? Am I wrong? Is going to move some control to Williamson County? Is that something different?
You're recognized, Mr. Sponsor.
Well, for one, no, there's no Williamson County reference in the statute. And 2 is there is still what I would refer to as local control, because under this particular legislation, the members of the board still have to be from Davidson County, where the airport in this particular instance is located. So there's not a movement from providing anything to do with any type of local control versus state control. But nonetheless, we have a situation where the only person at this particular point of the way it exists now comes from one county, and that one person from that one county can appoint the entire board, and that one county does not invest in the airport authority. All Tennesseans invest in this airport. So therefore, it only makes sense that those that are on the commission are therefore appointed by all Tennesseans, since all Tennesseans pay taxes.
One follow-up, please, sir.
So I'm gathering what you're saying. If the state of Tennessee is putting money in, that it should be the decision maker. I differ with that. And when you say local control, in my mind, what you're taking away from the ability of, I'm going to use the term, qualified people in different professions to be on that board, to be more in a political perspective with appointments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Clemens, you're recognized, sir.
No.
I'm
do
sorry.
I get a response?
Did you have a comment?
Oh, sure. Well, the legislation, I would assume you've read it, does have qualifications that they must be part of the aviation industry, an engineer, someone in finance or commerce, someone in the legal field. So it's not, therefore, it will not be someone that's just a political appointment. So the legislation covers that.
Representative Clemens.
Mr. Chairman, can you put me at the end of the list, please?
All right.
Thank you.
Next on the list then is Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Garrett, why in section 1 are you deleting 424105B that has a provision related to Black representation on the board?
In which section?
424105, the governing body, subsection B, related to Black representation on the board. You're deleting that provision. Why is that?
I do believe that under the board, there has to be a commissioner of, excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, thank you. That under section E of the bill, there does have to be a member of a minority.
Representative Jones, one follow-up, please.
Well, I think there's a confusion with my other question. It was section 1 of the amendment, but it's 424105B, talking about specifically a Black representative on the board and one female representative, and they cannot be the same. They cannot meet the same quota by just having a Black female. Why are you deleting that provision?
Mr. Sponsor, you recognized.
It's not deleted. It's in the new version of the amendment.
Thank you. Next on the list is Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I noted, it sounds like we're certainly changing the control without changing the entity for sure. Will the Metro Council still have a vote on all the appointees?
You recognize Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you. It's the mayor that would have an appointment.
Follow-up, please, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, but the appointees by the other entities, will they also be approved by the Metro Council?
You recognize Mr. Sponsor.
I'm not sure I understand when you say the other entities.
All right, for point of clarity then, Representative Johnson, you wish to clarify that?
Sure. All those appointed to the board that are not appointed by the mayor, that are appointed by the state?
You recognize Mr. Sponsor.
You are asking if those have to be approved by whom?
Representative Johnson.
Metro Council.
You recognize, sir.
No, they're appointed by the elected officers that's in the legislation.
Thank you. Next on the list is Representative Hemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of your comments, you said the state funds the airport operations. And after we talked on Friday, I went through and looked at a lot of the operational reports from Metro's airport, as well as a lot of other ones in the state, and had a lot of useful information that came up with that, and I wanted to share some of it with you. And first thing is, well, at least Metro, the one thing I found different about Metro Nashville Airport is different is it's actually very, very successful. It's actually one of the only ones that is making a significant amount of money. It actually made $18 million net operating income this last year and $210 million in revenue in 2022. But when you actually break down the operating revenue, it's 100% operated by the revenues created on site. So the Metro Nashville Airport Authority is actually paying it, but the capital revenues or the capital grants. So that in the last 3-year total, the FAA is only given 4.5%. The state is only given 9% of the total capital outlay, and the actual airport has given the overwhelming majority of 86.6% of that. So here we're in a situation where you're saying the state is putting in an overwhelming majority of the money, but it's not actually the case. So we're sitting here with a bill asking to take over 100% of the airports when state's only putting in 9% of the capital budget. So it seems to be a lot different. In fact, I'm looking at the different operations from the airport. Your own county's airport is losing money.
Representative Hemmer, can you get to your question, please?
Yeah, so I'm just curious, why are we putting 9%, with the state putting only 9% of the capital budget, and we're taking 100% of the seats? That doesn't seem fair, does it to you?
You recognize Mr. Sponsor?
Because Metro is putting in 0%.
Representative Hemmer, follow up.
So they're also not, the local is not putting in money in Memphis and Shelby County Airport and Knoxville Airport and Chattanooga, which are other important airports. Quite frankly, I think Memphis, Shelby County has the most strategic importance of all the airports, being that it's the number 2 cargo airport in the world. It has FedEx. It has a huge, huge economic impact with all the logistics business. When I was at ECD, I learned that firsthand when we had a logistics company move a couple miles down the road to Mississippi and created a huge hole in the budget. So I think if there's any strategic importance to putting state involvement in airports, it should be all of the regional airports, because they're all in the same financial situation, other than the fact that actually Metro is making money and being successful versus the other regional airports. So again, why are we not having all the other airports having state involvement?
You recognize Mr. Sponsor?
This legislation only deals with metropolitan governments.
Okay, would you be willing to add the other?
You're not
state airports?
recognized, sir, please. We're run short on time. Representative Clemens, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to respond to the statement that Metro is putting in nothing on this. I would just point out that it's Metro Police, Metro Fire Department, Nashville Department of Transportation, all service this airport directly funded by the taxpayers of this county, which actually amounts to a quite a bit of money. So the notion or the statement that Metro government is putting nothing into this airport is blatantly false. Now, what I've not heard through this whole presentation, the statements of the sponsor or answers to any questions, is a rational justification for the necessity of this legislation. I've heard that the state wants to take it over. I've heard false statements about the statute creating this board, but in fact, the state actually empowered Metro government to create this board. And Metro, in fact, did create the board. The law, in fact, says that the body creating the board act as an agency should have control over the board. So if we're going to get this thing wrapped around the statutory axle, I think we need to get the facts straight. So I want to know what the rational justification for the necessity of this legislation really is.
You're recognized, Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you. And a couple of corrections that the representative from Nashville is incorrect on. The airport authority has its own police department, has its own fire department, has actually its own SWAT team. In fact, it doesn't even use those services in the sense of when, there's mutual aid agreements between different departments from the federal government, from the state government, when there's maybe need an ambulance that might need to come to the Metro, or they don't have an infirmary. I don't believe they have a medical doctor on staff. So there are incidental small services that are like that, but make no mistake, the airport has its own police force, has its own fire force, has a SWAT team that's all funded and ran and under the airport jurisdiction only. So his statements about that all these services are private police it's just not accurate. The rational basis is all Tennessee taxpayers. Now, I didn't say it was an overwhelming majority of the funding that one of a representative from the Nashville said. I said that it's a major funding. And for me, just in the past decade, for us to be able to have $130 million of taxpayer dollars to fund the Metro Airport Authority, a $6 million appropriation this year, so it's actually going more. We want that investment from our folks back home. We want to partner. We want to make sure this airport is as successful as it has been. We want to see the sustainability of the airport for years to come. And again, we are only, under this legislation, appointing the commissioners to make sure the Tennessee taxpayer dollars are spent wisely, invested wisely, to make sure that the airport has sustainability and successibility, if that's a word.
Representative Clemens, one follow-up, please. And please be succinct, sir.
Yeah, just clarification. I'll just say that in recent years, Metro Nashville Police Department and Nashville Fire Department have responded to over 2,400 times to BNA and provided services, as well as collaborated with the airport itself. So I want to make sure we're straight on that. Now, with regards to the rational justification for the necessity of this legislation, I still haven't heard an answer. Can you please elaborate on what any justification for this is? Perhaps there's board members on there who want to be reappointed and they're worried about the reappointment. I don't know.
Please
But
be
could you
succinct,
please
sir.
enlighten us?
Please be succinct. Mr. Sponsor, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I've stated, this airport now is not just within the arms, the boundaries of Davidson County. You've got 70% of Tennesseans, 70% of Kentuckians, 70% of Alabamans that cross this country that use this airport. This airport is not just confined to those in Davidson County. That's one basis for our constituents and all Tennesseans to have a stake in their own tax dollar that's going to fund some of the operations of the airport authority.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're running short on time. I'm going to recognize two more people. Representative Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Garrett, when we look at this legislation, I hear a lot of the language of partnership, and I represent the airport. It's in my district. But what we see here is not really a good faith effort of negotiating with the local community. when I look at this bill, we have how it's structured now, we have a nonpartisan mayor who appoints the majority of appointments. You're substituting that for partisan elected officials appointing the members of this board. Would that politicize this board, in your opinion?
You're recognized, sir.
I don't believe it will.
Representative Jones, one follow-up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My second question is, you say that the entities that are funding this board should have a say in who makes the appointments. So since the federal government is putting in money as well, what percentage of appointment should the federal government have to tell us? How much should Washington tell us how we appoint our board, since they also put in money into this airport? What is your opinion on that?
You recognize, sir.
Well, personally, I don't want the federal government involved in all, so I would say none.
Representative Faison, you recognize? Where'd you go? Oh, there he is. You're recognized, sir.
Well, I had questions specifically. The gentleman with his subjective thoughts was talking about bonding, and I saw the comptroller back there, but I can tell you're driving this train pretty fast. So I wanted to hear from the comptroller, if possible, to find out bonding, because we're talking, if your bond rating is off, that's a situation, Mr. Chair. And so the gentleman was given some subjective thoughts about bonding, and it kind of made me nervous, but I don't want to derail this train that you're driving. So if that's possible, we could hear from the comptroller, talk about it. That's fine. If not, that's fine too.
Actually, we didn't get the comptroller on our list, sir. However, I think it's widely known that the Tennessee state government has one of the highest bond ratings in the country. I think they're the fourth highest, and AAA on all the bond rating agencies. With that said, Chairman Carr, you have a question, sir? One, please. One question, sir.
Call the question.
Chairman Carr has called the question. Are there any objections? I see 3 hands. We are voting on calling the question. All in favor of calling the question indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay.
No.
Ayes have it. We are now voting on a positive recommendation for this bill to go to calendar and rules. Pardon me, I'm sorry, finance means, wrong page. The bill will go to Finance, Ways and Means with a positive recommendation if enough ayes are present. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay.
No.
Ayes have it. If you wish to be recorded as a no, please see the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor and committee members. At this time, since I'm carrying the next bill, I'm going to pass the gavel to Vice Chairman Reedy.
Thank you, Chairman Reagan. Members, item number 4 on our calendar, House Bill 206. Chairman Reagan, you are recognized on the bill, sir. We have a motion and a second. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a sunset extension. It extends the Department of Health to June 30th, 2027. If there are questions, we have representatives of the Department of Health present. With that, sir, I ask for a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions from the committee? Are we ready to vote? It looks like we're ready to vote. All in favor of moving House Bill 206 onto calendar rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposition, nay. Bill moves out. Chairman Reagan, you are recognized for your new gavel, sir.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have no other business to come before us. Without objection, we are adjourned.